What happens to a country when a country's cost of living becomes too expensive? It can lead to a lower standard of living, increased income inequality, economic slowdown, etc. Generally, people start to leave. Canadian, right? People suffer. Some of them go hungry. A few will probably die, but the government won't admit that lack of helping people with finances is the cause. A few people will leave, but usually not the poorest of people unless things get really dire. Leaving costs money after all. If it gets really dire, even the poor people will leave, even if it means walking for days or paying a shady trafficker and hope not to trafficked into slavery or die along the way. I guess one of the first signs is brain drain and outflow of affluent or educated migrants or refugees, depending on how bad it gets to neighboring countries. Social unrest increases and people increasingly accept political violence. This can have very different outcomes: a revolution which changes the class makeup and redistributes wealth, an authoritarian takeover that keeps most people poor through repression, a genocide. Black market economies flourish as the standard retail outlets basically price themselves out of the market. You see a lot of this in South American countries, where inflation has been allowed to run amok for, in some cases, decades. The market moves to meet the people, and often that means moving away from food safety and any kind of government oversight. For an example of this happening in real time in the US on a smaller scale, look at Hawaii. Extremely high cost of living, lower than average wages in basically every industry. Hawaii has a massive shortage of education and medical care professionals. State government positions have been unfilled in every agency for years, with basically every department struggling to recruit. There's mass out-migration from Hawaii, with more and more local families leaving because they cannot afford rent, let alone a home. Hawaii has the worst per capita homeless rate in the US, and more native Hawaiians live on the continent than live in Hawaii. Hawaii's population is only remaining somewhat stable because of the high demand for wealthy transplants to move in, people who are deluded by living in paradise not realizing how expensive it really is in Hawaii, or locals that want move because this is home and they are still managing to get by, even if it means basically everyone that's not already wealthy will never retire. Just as an example of wages, I get paid about 60 what an equivalent position with my credentials and experience would get paid on the continent. Eventually, the majority of people become poor and middle class starts to disappear. People are either rich or poor. Everything you make at your job becomes highly taxed, leaving you with no money. Kind of like what we are seeing today. Hyperinflation can happen. It happened in Venezuela. Uprising. Revolution. Cows. Communism. They start to leave and go to some better third world countries. I mean, it really can't, because people are paying the prices. You know, the old supply and demand. People pack up their valuables with their prejudices and seek refuge elsewhere. Or they demand the government fix it, get huffy when the government fails to, and end up in an unplanned and ineffective rebellion. ISIS can be traced directly to the effects of a drought. Ask Australia about all the Kiwis living there. It turns into Venezuela. It's not pretty. Usually it leads to revolution, armed insurrection, or violent rebellion. It never ends up pretty, but politicians, economists, bureaucrats, and businessmen seem to be not well versed in history and unfortunately repeat the same mistakes responsible for collapsing empires and entire civilizations. I think you might want to think about the question: prices only go up when someone is paying the prices. Rent, utilities, groceries only go up when people pay the prices. When this happens, it tends to change the nature of a country, not by people leaving, but less or different people arriving. Southern Florida has changed this way. A more affluent people have filled the voids, either from the Northeast or from Latin America. Manhattan, NY is going through the same thing.